Let's see, really. Do you know, sorry, just with the UKIP thing, it's like you can go to a party and you can stand outside and get somebody to bring you a drink, or you can go in and engage. This is what Labour wants to do. We want to engage with business, we want to engage with money, and to attack charities. To attack charities for receiving funding from Europe, I think it's just a little bit low. What we're talking about, the influence of big business. I would certainly agree with what Ruth is saying. I think there has to be, and certainly the party has moved to more clearer transparency about the lobbying system. It's been very murky for quite a long time, and I think there's something that the parties are moving towards actually clearing up, so that there is a register, it's very clear. The Labour Party and the Party of the European Socialists is campaigning to have a greener Europe. At the end of 2009, as I'm sure you're all aware, they've got to sit down, they've got to negotiate a world treaty, and it's something that we're calling for, which is a 30% reduction. So there is a real desire to move forward and make Europe a greener place, but to use the influence that Europe has to actually influence that agenda. Yeah, Obama's come up with his promises, but I think they could go a lot further.
Well, this is another hard one. How do you diminish, restrict somehow the role of big business? I mean, it's not that we don't know that big business is lobbying. When the chemical industry comes out in force across Europe to try and lobby against a piece of legislation, you know it's there because their people are everywhere. But of course, they're not coming and saying, threatening, for example. What they're doing is they're bringing their trade unionists along, or their employees, and saying, our jobs are under threat as a result of this potential measure. And you say, well, this potential measure is going to help the environment. Well, they say, well, it may help the environment, but I'm going to be out of a job, so you're my representative, how do you vote? That's how it works. So the Commission does give money to some of the, for example, some of the environmental NGOs, WWF and Friends of the Earth, for special projects. It's nothing secret about this, it's all on public record, all this information is available. As you know, UKIP, which has the worst environmental record of any of the British political parties, not surprisingly, because they vote against almost all European legislation, and therefore they vote against all European environment legislation. UKIP opposes this. But I don't know the answer. I mean, here we have this Ruth said. Obama facing, trying to get a cap and trade bill through the Senate, which will put a limit on the amount of emissions coming from American industry, with the big American fossil fuel, the coal plants and the oil manufacturers and the oil companies, all lobbying very hard, working very hard on their senators to try and make sure that they vote against that legislation. I don't know what the answer is. If anyone's got any suggestions, please pass them on.
Yes, ban oil and gas companies funding parties, for example.
So,
just a second, sorry, Gabriel, that's the question, I'm sorry. We've gone through everyone on the panel. I just want to get Alex in as well, and then I'm actually going to throw the floor open for general questions as well as questions about stuff. Okay, that's it. Okay, Gabriel, do you want to... What was the question? Sorry, quite interrupted. Oh, okay.
So the suggestion would be to ban any big business making a donation to a political party, since it so clearly impacts on their sovereignty and their ability to make decisions without having to worry about, oh well, Exxon gave me £100,000, I better vote against this piece of legislation.
Does that point to anyone in particular, Gabriel, before?
There was a suggestion. The question that there was a request for suggestions, and there's my response.
Well, on that specific point, we have quite onerous rules here in the UK on political donations. Certainly, any business registered in the United Kingdom has to declare that donation in its annual accounts. There is some talk, there's been ongoing debate about putting a cap on the donations to political parties, say £50,000 a year, but then you get into the argument of, well, can we exempt trade unions? Can we... you get into all the opt-out clauses, and and you get into the argument, well, if we can't raise funding via that mechanism, will you agree to some state funding of political parties? So you end up into this circular argument. What I think the key principle in all of this is, and we've touched on it time and time again, but it's transparency. We need to know who's donating money and to whom. And if it's out on the table, then we can make our own judgments of what the consequences of that donation might be.
Okay, I'm getting the sense that quite a few of you have questions that maybe aren't being covered by the ones that have been put in the box. So if anybody's got any general questions, speak now or forever held to please. Okay, so that gentleman over there.
Given that the Labour and Liberal Democratic parties promised to hold a referendum on the European Constitution and have backtracked on that promise, and the Conservative Party promised to withdraw from the European People's Party and has put that promise off, how can we trust you?
Okay, any other questions as well while we're just right in the crowd? Okay, we'll take these two questions and then we'll answer them and then we'll come back for more.
Right, you speak about sort of transparency being the answer to the problem in Europe, but how would you sort of enforce that transparency? Because if people are willing to play the system, and surely there's ways around sort of being honest about what you do. So what's the solution?
Okay. And
okay, this is more for my American listeners on my radio show, but after 100 days and withdrawal from Guantanamo Bay, is Barack Obama still change we can believe in, or has he outstayed his welcome already?
Okay, so at this end of the table, so if Ruth, you want to go first, and then pass along.
Do you want me to answer all?
Yep. That's time as well.
Right. So fairly quickly on all of them then. How can you trust us? I hope you can trust Green Party politicians. Have a look at their record, see what you think, ask us questions, and we'll try and answer you. I can't speak for the other parties. On the referendum on a constitution, the Green Party's position is that Europe does need a constitution because we do need to protect people's rights, especially in light of big business influence, and we need to set limits on the powers that Europe has. But we are also in favour of a referendum. So our policy is quite clear, but it's also our policy that we'd have a referendum. And that's what we'd be calling for in the EU. Okay, second question on enforcement. I think it's a difficult one. I think people are always going to play the system. I think people are going to try and find ways around it. But I think the penalties for doing that have to be clear and they have to be properly enforced. On Obama, is he still someone that we can believe in? I really hope so, because a lot of things that he seems to be saying are good. He seems to have changed his mind on pulling out of Iraq, at least in terms of the speed that he's pulling out. He does seem to be being influenced more by the military than I was hoping that he would be, but I'm still holding out for him to keep the promises that he made when he was elected, and I think he's made a lot of really good statements, and hopefully will take action on things like climate change in ways that George Bush never did, and I'm hoping that they'll start pulling out of Afghanistan, although that's not what he's saying at the moment, and that they'll start looking at other ways to try and find peace, or at least to be part of a process that leads to peace in that region.